and welcome again to our podcast. And very excited today to have Randy Bean on with us today. And Randy is he's a founder. I mean, he's a multifaceted guy. He's a founder, he's a CEO, he's an author, speaker, senior advisor, innovation fellow, and board member. That's quite a mouthful. A lot of hats to wear. And he's the best-selling author of Fail Fast, Learn Faster: Lessons in Data-Driven Leadership in an Age of Disruption, Data, and AI. And that's his book. Nice work, Randy. And he's also a regular contributor to Forbes, Harvard Business Review, MIT Sloan Management Review. He's been quoted in a range of different publications on data and AI leadership, such as Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and The Economist. So how he got here, he was previously a founder and CEO with New Vantage Partners, which was a data and AI leadership advisory firm to Fortune 1000 clients, which he founded back in 2001. And it was acquired by a Paris-based global consultancy called Wavestone in 2021, where he's then served as an innovation fellow through 2023. And he's a frequent industry keynote and panel moderator on the topic of data and AI leadership. So really good to have you on. And you know, certainly there's a lot of credentials there. So looking forward to an exciting conversation on this front.
I'm delighted to be here with you today, Rupert. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too. Right. Well, look, what I tend to open up a little bit broad here, really, which is, you know, we all talk about AI in its current guise today, but what really got you excited about AI back in the day when you started your journey? And I'm guessing this was all those years ago when you set up MVP.
Yeah, well, you know, actually, it predates that by 20 years. I've been in the industry for 45 plus years now. And, you know, I mean, AI was used, you know, when I started in the industry in 1979, 1980. As a matter of fact, last year, in December of 2023, I keynoted an event in Boston. And the first day was billed as the 10th annual Chief Data Officers event. And I moderated the keynote panel at the beginning. And the second day was billed as the first ever Chief AI Officer Summit. When I got up there, I scratched my head and I said, I thought the first Chief AI Officer Summit was in 1962. And half the people just, you know, that they just had no idea what I was talking about. But, you know, the term was first coined in whatever the year was, 1954. So it's been around for a long time. And, you know, even early in my career in the 1980s, I was using natural language. So it's been around a long time. I have a colleague that I worked with for many years who had a PhD from Yale University in artificial intelligence, got his PhD in the early 1980s. And 3 or 4 years ago, I said, Bill, we have an AI project. He said, I've given up on AI. It's never going to happen. You know, people keep on talking about it and it keeps on disappearing. But this time around, it's really happened.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that really all that's changed is, well, I think a lot has changed, but we think of AI just really in its current terms from the Google paper back in whenever it was, 2019, around transformers and things like this, right? Really, it's an advancement of all of that early machine learning days, all those neural network days, and all that early NLP kind of work that was going on. But I think it's like anything; it's just in the zeitgeist now, right? It's just that it's known and it's thought about, and generative AI is really what's pushing us forward, right? When you think about generative AI? What about that gets you really excited versus kind of the old, more pure kind of algorithmic machine learning type of AI?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things there. One is I'm still learning, and I think we're all still learning. So that's the mindset that I adopt. But for 4 years, I've been co-authoring a series for MIT Sloan Review called AI in Action with my colleague, Tom Davenport. And I remember as recently as 2 or 3 years ago, we'd interview somebody from a major corporation, and I'd say to him, wow, that was really good, really interesting. He'd say, yeah, but it's not AI. So, you know, AI has taken many forms and many shapes, and, you know, there's machine learning. But now, you know, generative AI has caught on, and it has captured the imagination of people in all walks of life, and businesses are rapidly attempting to adopt Gen AI capabilities. I actually serve on the board as an advisor to a company called GAI Insights out of Boston. They sponsor an event called Gen AI World, a couple former Harvard University fellows and professors, and hosted a dinner in Boston 2 weeks ago where I had people from a number of companies talking about what they were doing in in terms of Gen AI in their organizations. And every one of these conversations, I learn so much more than I know. So, I wind up going to places and people say, okay, speak to us about AI and Gen AI because you're the expert. But, it's what I learn in each moment. I will say a year and a half ago, I was skeptical because I often am about new technologies and people were saying, oh, AI and Gen AI. There were two sets of people. One set of people said, it's going to do all these magical, mystical things. I'm like, yeah, that's not really how technology works. And then these other set of people were saying, it's going to destroy the universe. It's going to destroy mankind. It's going to put everybody out of their jobs. And I said, let's not react too quickly. But I went to this event, Wall Street Journal Tech Live, out in Laguna Beach, and it turns out it was a small gathering, about 200 folks, and it turns out that the person that showed up to do the keynote was Sam Altman of OpenAI. And just listening to him after that, I said, whether you like it or you hate it, it's inevitable and it's going to happen. So that's where we are, and we're right in the moment, and we're learning, and it's clearly, from my perspective, the most transformational technology in a generation. It's not the printing press, but, it is the internet on steroids.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that is now finally accepted is AI as a tooling rather than a sort of a single panacea for everything, right? It's a mechanism that's going to help us to be more productive, more effective, and better at doing the work that we already do, and also probably unlock opportunities to do work that we haven't been able to do as well. And I think that takes away a little bit of the fear factor. I think people have got to that point now. I know that, and you're just talking about kind of some of the work that you've done with a range of different companies thinking about what they're doing in the future and how they're reacting to AI. I know you've also done a survey, which you do quite regularly around this topic. Do you want to talk to some of the kind of findings around that survey in terms of what companies are doing? And I think in particular, maybe anything that was contrary to what you might have expected?
Yeah. So a few things. Conduct this survey every year. Have been doing it since 2012, and it was initially more data focused, and then it's evolved into an AI focus over the past couple of years. But there were some basic questions that asked: is your organization increasing its investment in data and AI? 98.4% said yes, so it's pretty ubiquitous. Investments in data and AI are a top organizational priority. 90.5% said yes. Last year I asked a question. I said, are you establishing safeguards and guardrails around responsible use of AI? And 99% said yes. So my joke was, I wonder what the other 1% are doing, But another thing, because I've spent a lot of time involved with data, and good data provides the foundation for good AI, a question that asked this year is interest in AI leading to a greater focus on data within your organization? 93.7% said yes. So people that have been involved with data, managing data, organizing data, analyzing data for decades, now it's really their moment. AI has very much put data in the spotlight. And I could go into other areas as well, but I'll pause here.
Yeah, let me ask a little bit of that data point. So to drill down a little bit into that, is your sense that it's the data point is more around training for models, or is it more around using data effectively?
Well, I'll answer it this way, because there's so much enthusiasm and so much talk and so much writing about Gen AI. But when you look at Fortune 1000 organizations, it's important to keep in mind that 90% of Fortune 1000 companies are legacy companies, which means they've existed for more than a generation. So they don't have to compete with that 10%, which is Meta and Alphabet, whatever they call themselves these days, Apple, et cetera, Amazon. They just need to compete against their peers, the other 90%. So one of the questions we asked this year is, what stage are you at in terms of your Gen AI implementation efforts? And last year, only 4.9% said they had implemented in production at scale, and 95.1% said they were at an early stage. So the good news, or the glass half empty or half full, is that This year, 77% still say they're at an early stage, but 23.9% now said that they've implemented Gen AI in production, which is a five-fold increase from last year. So even though it's not the majority, it's a quarter, it's a big difference from the 5% last year.
And again, on that, do you have a sense of, it's very broad. In some ways, it's quite a broad question, right? Are you further on the curve on AI, basically? But I guess the question is, do you have a sense of where they're using that AI, and maybe within the business rather than anything else? As customer service agents, as sales outreach tools, anything that you think you can highlight on that?
Well, I write a lot about what various organizations are doing, and probably one of the more concrete examples is I wrote about Ally Financial last year, and they wanted to publish the results quickly. So they implemented Gen AI in a number of their customer service functions, and they were achieving significant increases in productivity, and they're continuing to publish their results. So that would be an example. I just co-authored an article that was published last week about Colgate-Palmolive and some of the things that they're doing in terms of innovation with AI in their business. So those are some examples.
Okay. And because I think maybe I'll move on to a little bit onto that sort of agentic AI type space, because I think that's where now everyone's moved on from, okay, we understand, ChatGPT and the basics of generative AI. We know how to get it to do interesting stuff right now. We're now onto that next stage where it's like, we actually want operators. We want AI to do a number of linked tasks that could actually achieve productivity gains, which hasn't really been something we've been able to do in the past, but perhaps we're moving to this year. And I think a lot of people are saying 2025 is a year of agentic AI. Have you spoken to any businesses? Have you seen any suggestions? Have you heard anything in the market about what they're doing to try and get on board with that trend?
Yeah, I'm going to hedge on that question in the sense that just published an article in January in MIT Sloan Review, and it was 5 trends for the year, and co-authored it with my colleague Tom Davenport. And one of the trends that we talk about, the first trend is about agentic AI, and the other trends are about cultural change, the emergence of the chief AI officer role. So I deferred to Tom on the agentic AI questions because he's been digging into that a lot deeper, and I spoke more to the cultural, organizational change and those type of issues, but business value.
Makes sense. Well, let's dig into that, because I've been quite vocal, perhaps contrarian, around chief AI officers. And, you made the point, and I think it was even in your survey as well, like people have appointed lots of the chief AI officers. I mean, I do question where these people have actually come from in terms of credentials, because it's a role that didn't exist, and therefore where do you find someone who's experienced at that executive level where it hasn't existed? And to my mind, it strikes me as more of a project manager or coordinator to help align the activities of AI as we're trying to get under the hood of it and understand it. But I would like to see every role having AI as a tool set which they're very competent and capable of using. Do you have an observation about these chief AI officers, where they're coming from, what their activities are they're doing in the organization, where they're adding value, that sort of thing?
Yeah, this is actually a topic I could speak on for hours, if not days. But let me put it in a particular context, because I've been very heavily involved in in organizations establishing the chief data officer role. So let me give a little bit of context to that and then speak to chief AI officer. So chief data officer is really a role that's only come into existence within the past 15 years or so. And that was primarily as an outgrowth of the financial services crisis of the 2007-2008 period. So when first started this survey, it was actually at the urging of a number of organizations, their CIOs, and they want to understand whether this chief data officer role was going to come into existence. So in 2012, only 12% of Fortune 1000 companies surveyed had appointed a chief data officer. It was only in 2017 that had increased to over half, 55%. And this year, it was 84.3%. So the chief data officer role has become pretty ubiquitous. But it means a lot of things to a lot of different organizations. So at the same time, if we ask whether the role has been successful, it's still less than half. And the turnover is very high with an average tenure of 2 to 3 years. So this year, we also asked, because we'd seen the emergence of Chief AI Officer, we asked, has your organization appointed a Chief AI Officer or equivalent? And I was astonished because I thought the numbers would be around 12%, but instead it was 33%. So roughly a third of the organization said that they had appointed somebody with responsibility for AI. On top of that, we asked whether organizations believe that somebody should be appointed to the Chief AI Officer role, and 43% said yes. So you ask, what do these people do and where do they come from? So I think a lot of it's like the state of the Chief Data Officer role. So for example, I mentioned the event in Boston last year that I participated in, 10th Chief Data Officer Day and 1st Chief AI Officer Day. So because it was the 10th Chief Data Officer Day, as you can imagine, most of the discussion was complaints. Okay, the organization doesn't treat us with respect. We don't get the funding and support we need. They don't really understand the value of data, et cetera, et cetera. The second day, the Chief AI Officer Day, because it was a green field and blue sky, it was just, we're going to change the world. Everything's going to be amazing. This is going to be the greatest experience. And I turned to all the Chief Data Officers in the room and I said, I have the answer to your problem. You just call yourself a Chief AI Officer and nobody will know the difference. And for the next 3 years, you'll have unfettered opportunity to do what you do without, until the point comes where people say, where's the return on the investment that we're making? So I could follow this down a number of paths, but I'm going to pause there to see which path you want to dig deep.
Yeah. So I'm paraphrasing here. It sounds like to answer the question, where do these chief AI officers come from? It's just they're a rebadged CDO. Is that fair, or is that a little unfair?
Not one size fits all. So it depends. They come in all shapes and sizes and from all contexts and backgrounds. But one of the things that was said to me recently that stuck with me that I'm thinking about, I need to prove it out or understand what it really means, is that somebody explained to me, well, there's a difference between the Chief AI Officer and the Chief Data Officer. And I said, okay, what's that? And they said, well, the Chief AI Officer is really focused on the end application. And the Chief Data Officer, their mandate is really to make sure that the data foundation is in a good place for the Chief AI Officer to use that information. Now, that being said, in some organizations, the Chief AI Officer is a peer of the Chief Data Officer. So there's that complementary evolution from preparing the data to the application. In other organizations, the Chief AI Officer reports to the Chief Data Officer. So it's the Chief Data Officer that has that end-to-end mandate. So it's manifesting itself in different organizations in different ways. And in the same way that the Chief Data Officer has evolved. So in its early years, it was largely a defensive role, risk and regulatory. Now it's moved into an offensive role. How can it be used to grow and build the business? But as a consequence of that, in the early years, many of the Chief Data Officers were what I called subject matter experts. In other words, they knew the architecture, they knew the engineering, they knew data quality, the integration, but they really weren't focused on solving business problems. And these days, you see more and more Chief Data Officers come out of business backgrounds. For example, at Capital One, their new Chief Data Officer, her responsibilities previously was she was president of Capital One UK. So she ran the whole business end to end. So I'm seeing more and more people from these strong business backgrounds assuming the Chief Data Officer role. And just one other point here, in terms of reporting relationships, we asked this in the survey, and still just about half report into the technology organization. But this year, 37% reported into business leadership, the CEO, the president, the COO. So we're seeing a transformation and an evolution, but it also depends upon the culture of the company, the industry, and other factors as well.
I mean, I wonder, is that move from the reporting line being into technology through to the reporting lines being more on the business side, is that move more because the nature of the role is changing or the importance of the role is changing?
Both, all of the above. I mean, as particularly with AI, data is elevated importance because you can't have great AI without great data. Also, investments in data and AI are being tied more and more to delivery of business results and business value. In other words, it's not just build a data repository, but how is this helping us acquire new customers, retain existing customers, improve customer service? So it's those type of metrics that are being applied.
Okay, so I guess one last question on this particular topic. What, in your experience, having met with these people, what do they actually do?
So let me put this into context. So when the chief data officer role was first established after the financial services crisis, the first chief data officer for a major bank, in this case Citigroup, was hired out of my firm. So it was kind of there from ground one, and subsequently started advising organizations on what the CDO role could and should be. And we even staffed on an interim basis the CDO role for the largest insurance companies and others. So, so your question in terms of what should be the responsibility of the chief data officer, is that the fundamental?
Well, I think it's actually, so yes, it's more in practical terms. I'm thinking forward to a chief AI officer.
Sure.
What in practical terms are they doing on a day-to-day basis? And again, it comes back to this point of my summation is that from my experience, it tends to be more of a project management, making sure the multiple work streams around the implementation of AI are going effectively, whether it's the technological element, building into the commercial strategy, etc. But I'm just curious to know what you've seen in terms of what the chief AI officers actually do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I'd say the chief AI officer, there's two things that they're fundamentally mandated with right now. One is to develop the strategy, the plan. In other words, where we are today and where we want to get to over what period of time, and what are the steps and actions that we need to take, not only in terms of business technology, but business processes and people and skills. The second one is responsible use of AI, particularly for Fortune 1000 companies. So it's not the Facebook thing, move fast and break things, or the Elon Musk Doge things, move fast and break things. It's the, you can't afford to break your customer franchise if you're a legacy company. And so as a consequence of that, there's a heavy focus on responsible AI, which means establishing the guardrails and safeguards. So, many organizations are focusing on that and being careful in terms of how quickly they move from experimentation to production.
Okay, now that makes perfect sense. Well, look, let's move on from that topic, because I think it's one of those ones where we probably don't quite know where it's going to end up, but it's a work in progress. You mentioned before very briefly about the cultural aspects of AI. I want to maybe dig into that a little bit, and just ask you, combination of what have you seen change around the nature of cultures in organizations you work with because of AI, and what do you think is likely to change in the future in terms of the nature of those cultures as a result of AI?
Okay, I'll throw out a little bit of data, and then maybe we can react to that. So one of the things that I try to gauge each year is organizational adoption and transformation, because one thing that historically, and I guess the older I get, the more I see this over and over again, so it becomes like a crystal ball. Change tends to take place gradually. I mean, it can be hugely transformative in certain sectors, but it tends to play out over a long period of time. I mean, the Industrial Revolution started, whenever 1810, thereabouts, steam engines, et cetera. But it played out over the better part of a century, okay? So these things manifest themselves over time. And if you look at the internet, 1997, 98, 99, the Amazons and others completely, started using the internet to sell their products and services to consumers. But it was during the pandemic that a number of, for example, a large insurance company came to me and said, we've done more to execute on our digital transformation strategy in the past 3 months than we did in the previous 20 years. So sometimes necessity is the mother of invention. So in that spirit, we ask each year about the progress of data and AI initiatives. And we asked, one of the questions we asked is, have you created a data and AI-driven organization? In 2021, less than a quarter, only 24% said yes, but this was before Gen AI hit. So now in the aftermath of Gen AI, we asked the same question this year, and there was an increase to 37.3%, so roughly 50% over the past 5 years. But still, a minority as opposed to the 67%, 63% that haven't. We've also asked, have you established a data and AI organizational culture? In 2021, it was 24.4%. So again, 1 out of 4. This year it was 32.5%. So improvement, but not a huge transformation over 50%. And when we ask, what is the principal challenge to becoming data and AI driven? The answer is invariably, we give them two choices to make it simple. We say, is it culture or is it technology? And this year the answer was 92% said it was all about cultural challenges, change management, business processes, skills and training, and only 8% said it was about technology. So the technology is there in abundance, but the ability of humans to integrate these new technologies into their traditional business processes, to develop the skill sets, those are the things that take time.
And you obviously gave a stat there on the increase in the application or the creation of a data and AI driven culture. What does that mean? How does that manifest in the culture?
Well, you could say it's a little bit subject to interpretation, but basically, I think when you see a data and AI-driven culture, you know it. And I'm going to actually respond to a previous question that you asked that I recall the answer to. So that is that, for example, Capital One, they're a bank. They've existed for a generation now. But the people that started Capital One, they were basically data and analytics folks. And they had developed these models, and they said, we can apply these models to credit cards and to banking. And eventually they offered a full range of banking services. So that's different than the legacy banks, the Citigroup and JP Morgans and Wells Fargos that have existed over the course of a century. But you asked me a question before, implicitly or explicitly, about the need for a chief AI officer, the need for a chief data officer. And I've pointed out to many audiences that, if you look at the Metas, the Alphabets, the Apples, the Amazons, they don't have chief data officers because it's in everybody's DNA, and that's expected. So in a way, when you have a chief data officer or a chief AI officer, you're kind of saying that, there's something over here, and we're trying to figure out how to bring it into the mainstream and integrate it into all of the processes and the culture of the organization, as opposed to those organizations that it's not something separate, it's a part of everything. So that's the point that I'd make. It's a little bit of a schism. There's two worlds, those companies that are AI and data born and driven and integrated. But those are, again, the minority of companies. They have the biggest market share now, market capitalizations, but 90% of the universe is still historic legacy companies.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it probably also relates to, is your product an AI product, or is your product something else? And you're trying to understand how you use AI to make it more effective. My sense is if your product's an AI product, you don't need a chief AI officer, you don't need a chief data officer, right? It's just ingrained in you're building a product. And that's when you talk about the digitally native businesses such as Meta and Amazon and Google, Alphabet, I should say. So I think that's probably the delineation. Is that fair?
Well, there's different industries have, if you're in, for example, financial services, you need to be inherently risk averse, heavily regulated. If you're in healthcare, pharmaceuticals, life sciences, drug discovery, you need to mitigate the risks. They're heavily regulated. So, in some industries, you can afford to take risks. If you're in fashion or consumer packaged goods or various aspects of technology, things change rapidly, and it's all about adapting quickly. But if you're in other organizations, the most important thing is getting it right, ensuring the safeguards, ensuring integrity and quality of information, and not to do anything to screw that up.
Yeah, no, and that is something that I've seen quite a lot. I mean, obviously in the work that we do, I find that there's often a request for, can you support with somebody to come and sit on a board who has AI skills and capabilities, because we want to ensure that, particularly to your point, we're actually mitigating risk. And there's a governance aspect to it, and it strikes me again that back to that chief AI officer role, it's a risk and compliance piece. It's a project management piece, but also probably it's a temporary piece until it's fully ingrained into people's workflows and their understanding of how to do business, whether you're a commercial leader, whether you're a legal, whether you're, any other part of the organization.
Absolutely. And that's one of the questions about the CDO role. And then it became the chief data and analytics officer, and now the chief AI officer, in the organizations that have them merged together into this chief data and AI officer role. We ask, because see it all the time, is this going to become a permanent C-suite role? Is it going to be a transitional role that goes away? And, it's interesting because these things are always subject to interpretation. So when asked the question this year, 70% said they thought it would be a permanent C-suite role. 29.2% said they thought it would be a transitional role that would go away. So I got interviewed a couple of weeks ago by CIO magazine, and the title was 29% believe that data and AI leadership will be a transitional role that will go away. So it's interesting. So they viewed the 29% as very high and notable enough to make a headline. If you ask me, what I forecast, it's hard to say, but I do think that these roles, data leadership and AI leadership, are change management roles. They are transformational roles, change agent roles, and as a consequence of that, there's probably a reasonable degree of likelihood that they'll meld into other organizations over time. And whether over time means 3 years, 5 years, or 25 years, it's to be determined.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement on that one. So look, as we're coming towards wrapping this up, I think the question I always like to ask, and just to be clear, I'm not going to hold you to this, is what do you think the future holds for AI in the next 12 to 18 months? What's going to really impact businesses around the world? What do people need to be thinking about, et cetera?
Well, the way I'm going to answer this is I mentioned the Wall Street Journal Tech Live event a year ago, and Sam Altman was there, and they were asking him all these questions about Gen AI, and he goes, who cares about Gen AI? And that's not what excites me. And they said, well, what excites you? And he said, artificial general intelligence, AGI. And he said, because that's the future. That's when a computer can do any cognitive task as well or better than a human being. I said, okay, wow, well, when is that going to come about? And Sam Altman, being Sam Altman, said, well, if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have said within the next decade. If you'd asked me a year ago, I would have said within the next 5 years. If you'd asked me 6 months ago, I'd said within the next 2 to 3 years. But if you're asking me here tonight, I need to go back to the lab and check.
I mean, there is a lot of talk about hitting AGI very, very soon. It is interesting, and I'll just maybe finish on this. It's interesting. Jensen Huang from NVIDIA had a keynote speech at CES this year, and one of the things he talked about was the movement into world AI models. And I think it's really fascinating because when we think about AGI, we're thinking about cognitive models, right? We're thinking about processing of information in small amounts of information to an extent, linguistic or whatever it might be, small amounts of information out. What's interesting about world AI models is saying, actually, it's the knowledge of the world around us, which is so multivariant and so deep. If you're a robot, for example, with AI, you need to be able to see something which has an exterior which looks soft and transmit that to your hand grip and know that it needs to be softer. As humans, we don't even think about that. And that's a very, very multifaceted thing. It's about the look, it's about the knowledge, it's about the space it sits in, etc. And I think when I heard that, it made me think about, well, AGI might be close in terms of sort of a cognitive processing, of basic in and basic out. But I think we might be quite a long way from that world AI, which is really what's needed for the next stage of evolution of AI, going into robotics and mechanics and all these sorts of things. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
I'll just add one thing, and that was about 9 months ago, I was in Boston with a friend of mine who runs a series of hotels in Boston and restaurants. And we were having lunch over a meal, and, because he thought I knew something about AI, he goes, hey, guess what? I'm using this generative AI stuff, and I think I can automate a lot of these back office processes, et cetera, and increase productivity using Gen AI. And what do you think? And I said, yeah, very possibly so. And he said, but, we'll always have the servers. And I said, you'll have robots for that. So, and literally I've told that story a couple of times. And they said, yeah, we were in Tokyo when they had robots bring us our meals. So a lot of these things are not that far away.
Yeah, no, the future is exciting, particularly for those of us that enjoy this sort of stuff. I think going right back to what we talked about at the beginning, I'm not sure it's that scary. I mean, it's a little scary, but the safeguards need to be in place. We need to have risk aversion, etc. But I'm still convinced that AI is still going to be a tool for us to be able to use effectively.
Absolutely.
But we shall see. Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure, Andy. I think a lot of food for thought there. I'm glad you're able to give us so many stats. I think it's interesting to kind of have the hard evidence on how things are progressing. And it's been really good to get your perspective and views on, particularly on the kind of leadership element, but also on the cultural elements as well. So with that, I think we'll kind of close out. It's been really great speaking with you, and hope you'll be able to join us again in a year's time when we find out that all the robots have taken over the world.
Well, there'll be AI doing the interview.
Absolutely. I won't even be here. It'll just be another version of me.
Great. Thank you, Rupert. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Thanks so much then, Randy.